Welcome to the fifth edition of the Miami Constitutional Crisis Seminar. We're particularly honored today to have Harold Hongju Koh, the Sterling Professor of International Law, as our speaker today. Professor Koh has a sterling resume. He graduated summa cum laude from Harvard College with a major in government, then studied at Oxford on a Marshall Scholarship, then went back to Harvard for his JD. Next, he clerked on the DC Circuit for Judge Malcolm Richard Wilkey and for Supreme Court Justice Blackmun. Then worked at Covington Burling and in the Justice Department. Professor Koh has spent much of his career teaching at Yale Law. Starting in 1985, I got to be in one of his first classes, one on national security law, which I still remember as one of my favorite classes in law school. Eventually, his colleagues made him the dean of the law school. Among his notable achievements while a professor was leading a group of students in the Human Rights Clinic in litigation against the U.S. government's detainment of Haitian refugees in Guantanamo. His student team won the case 8-1 in the Supreme Court. That's Haitian Centers Council versus Sale. And the detainees were released in 1993. I do have to note that the team also lost a companion case 8-1 in the Supreme Court, but nobody, not even Harold Koh, is perfect. Professor Koh had two important stints of government service. First as Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor under President Bill Clinton, and then later as a legal advisor of the Department of State in the Obama administration. In that role, he participated in a number of high-stakes decisions, not least the authorization of drone strikes and suspected terrorists in foreign countries, which he said in a much-noted speech, quote, comply with all applicable law, including the laws of war, unquote, citing principles of distinction and proportionality. The U.S., he said then, takes great care in the planning and execution to ensure that only legitimate objectives are targeted and that collateral damage is kept to a minimum. Now, Professor Koh's Yale Law online bio reveals that he's received 18 honorary degrees and more than 30 awards for his human rights work, including awards from Columbia Law School and the American Bar Association for lifetime achievements in international law. It tells me he's authored or co-authored 9 books. Professor Koh will be speaking to us today about administration assertions of emergency power, with particular reference to invocations of the Alien Enemies Act. Now, there's nothing more fun than hosting one of your favorite former law professors in a series like this, and it's doubly sweet when they're as distinguished as Professor Koh. I'm looking forward to this lecture, at least I was, until he told me he was going to proceed Socratically, which creates a certain risk of flashbacks, but I'm going to let him do that and turn it over to him anyway. Professor Koh, please take it away, and I'm going to put myself on mute for now.
Okay, well, it's great to be here. Welcome to all of you. I'm thrilled to be back at the University of Miami. I've spent a lot of happy days in Miami litigating on behalf of Haitian and Cuban refugees, and I have friends there from many different parts of the legal community. Michael Frumkin obviously is a very brilliant professor. He was a very brilliant and a scary student for a young professor. He had a younger brother who's also a very scary individual because he was so quick and insightful. And his son was also my student. But when I met Professor Frumkin's son, the first thing I said to him was, I'm not doing your kid. I've, in fact, had one student come up to me and say, I found your voice very soothing. And I said, why is that? And he said, because when I took your class, I was in my mother's womb. So I found it like a lullaby. Anyway, I wanted to talk today about emergency power, but it actually feeds into this book, which I don't know if you can see, but it's a book that I wrote in the last 2 years. It's called The National Security Constitution. Let me turn off my... It's called The National Security Constitution in the 21st Century by Yale Press. I first wrote the book in 1989 after the Iran-Contra affair. In fact, Michael was my student at the time. And when I turned it in, I thought, I've written the wrong book. I should write it about the present day because it ended with the Iran-Contra affair, and not many people know about the Iran-Contra affair or care about it now. And I thought sometime before it's too late, I'm going to rewrite that book as a summation of all I've learned. I've worked for 4 presidents in 5 different decades. In addition to the 2 stints Michael mentioned, I also worked at the Justice Department Office of Legal Counsel in the Reagan administration. And I worked for the Biden administration at the start of his time in 2021 as a senior political appointee in the legal advisor's office. But I've also litigated cases, hundreds of cases, it's fair to say. And I also represent countries before international courts. So on October 6th, I'll argue on behalf of the trade unions at the International Court of Justice on whether or not there's an international right to strike. So the book is a very simple story, which is if you've looked at the Constitution, you see that Congress, not the president, has the majority of the powers, enumerated textual powers in foreign affairs. So the question is, how did we get to our current state of affairs where the president is claiming nearly total power to run everything based on claims of national emergency? And we're seeing more and more dramatic assertions of this every day. And you see it in the readings for today. So maybe I could ask whether somebody could tell me what is the difference between Curtis Wright and Youngstown as an approach to constitutional theory about separation of powers in foreign affairs. You want to suggest, let me just go. Who read Justice Jackson's concurring opinion in the Steele seizure case? What did he say? Yeah, Alexander.
Hey, yeah, the Youngstown dissent, I mean, it kind of referred to different ebbs.
Concurrence.
Yeah, sorry, concurrence, apology. It referred to different ebbs of presidential power when the president has the most authority. It's kind of like when Congress has spoken about it, Congress hasn't spoken about it, and when Congress is kind of like ambiguous about it. Just kind of like a quick hit summary. Is that close enough?
So is the president's power in foreign affairs absolute and exclusive?
No, absolutely not.
Absolutely not. It's not. It's not absolute in that Congress and the courts also have power in foreign affairs. And it's not exclusive in that the other branches share that power. So in fact, an early title of this book was A Power Shared. But what Justice Jackson does is he suggests a 3-part framework where the president's power fluctuates depending on its concurrence with what Congress has suggested. So he says that when the president acts with Congress, his power is at its peak. When he acts without Congress speaking, his power is in a twilight zone. But then when he acts against Congress's express will, his power is at its lowest ebb. Now, in the Steele seizure case, Alexander, was the president's power to seize the steel mills in Youngstown, Ohio, upheld or not?
It was not upheld.
Because why? Based on that 3-part framework.
Because Congress had already asserted authority in the region, in the general scope of the power, correct?
Yeah, they had issued enacted a comprehensive legislation called the Taft-Hartley legislation, which the president didn't follow. So he was acting against congressional will. So that opinion from 1952 is often contrasted to Curtis Wright, or United States versus Curtis Wright Export Corporation, which I was in the Justice Department in the Reagan administration. We used to call that the Curtis Wright, so I'm right site. Why do we do that? Carrie?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? Why did we call it can you repeat that?
I represent Donald Trump. I want to do anything. What's your site? Curtis Wright. Why? Curtis Wright, so I'm right. Why would we say that?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
Sophia is raising her hand. So Sophia, you can weigh in and then I'll come back to you.
Hi, because Curtis Wright basically said that the president has broad authority to conduct foreign affairs. It's very starkly different than Youngstown, but I think it goes with foreign versus domestic power. So yeah, if we were on Trump's side, we'd like this case a lot.
It goes even further. It says the president is the sole organ of the nation in this foreign affair, in foreign affairs, the sole organ. So back to you, Alexander. Is that asserting an exclusive power?
I mean, you could be a lawyer and kind of argue what the definition of the foreign affairs, scope of foreign affairs is, but yeah, it's pretty close to assertion of. Is
it asserting a shared power? Or
no, it definitely is not asserting a shared power.
Right. So these are, by the way, 2 different Supreme Court opinions. Only 16 years apart, but asserting two dramatically different visions of what I call the national security constitution. A shared power vision, and then a vision of presidential unilateralism. The idea that the president's power is exclusive, and that in that vast external realm, they say, in the foreign affairs realm, neither Congress nor the courts have any role to play. So these are two very dramatically different pictures. And what I decided to do in the book was to track how these competing theories of presidential power operated over the course of American history. And the first chapters, it runs through America's infancy, the Constitution and its drafting, the Federalist Papers, to America's rise to be a regional power, the leadership of Teddy Roosevelt and the like, the Spanish-American War, on to dramatic assertions of presidential power, and up until the rise of the United States to be a global hegemon, which happened during and after World War II, and then the Cold War, and then into the 80s, where we had basically a perversion or inversion of foreign policy in the Iran-Contra affair, which indicated that there was a severe problem. Now, the watersheds during this period in the 20th century were, one, Vietnam, where Congress revolted against what they saw as the president's abuse of authority and took back a lot of power in the 70s and into the early 80s. They passed the War Powers Resolution, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the Trade Acts, etc. Now, last week you heard from another student of mine, Elias Soman, who's quite conservative, but he's one of the lawyers in the VOS selections case. What's the basic argument being made there? You had a class about tariffs, right? So, Misha.
The tariff power is a different power from the power to regulate commerce.
Right. So Congress has exclusive power to regulate commerce. Congress has the power to impose imposts and excises. Tariffs are taxes, essentially. And so the net result of that is that you would think that it's a congressional power. So on what basis is Trump imposing tariffs on his own? Misha?
On the basis of an act of Congress granting Trump the power, when he declares an emergency, to regulate international commerce.
Yeah, emergency power. That's the subject of this class. Now, none of you will remember, but there was a funny movie in our time called The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming. I think Michael remembers it well. And the great moment is that these Russian sailors from a submarine land in Nantucket, and they're sort of wandering around, and then they decide they want people to clear the streets. So they go, emergency, emergency, everyone get from the street. And people are looking at them like, what are you talking about? Here I am in Nantucket, it's my summer home, just walking around. And they're going, emergency, emergency, everyone to get from street. Now, Trump here asserts an emergency which requires him to impose tariffs. So there are 2 points about this. One is the mechanism by which he does it, and then the second is there a real emergency? So Misha, what do you want to say about the mechanism by which he imposes it? How do you trigger the International Emergency Economic Powers Act?
By a presidential declaration of an emergency may be the same as in the Emergency Powers Act, but maybe not. Or National Emergencies Act, sorry, not emergency.
Yeah, there's something called the National Emergencies Act, and you're allowed to declare a national emergency by executive order, and that's a trigger. That trigger allows you to get to a huge range of powers that Congress has given to the president by delegation in the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Now, the IEEPA, as it's known, is sometimes called IEPA, or some people call it YEPA. And when I was in the Justice Department, I asked people, can we do this under IEPA? And they said, it's called YEPA, not NOPA. If you invoke an emergency, you can do it. Now, Misha, does that seem to you to be a reasonable way to proceed?
To me, no, but a lot of this seems unreasonable to me.
Yeah, so fair enough. So what changed on January 20th, 2025?
Do you want a legitimate answer? Trump came in, reasonableness went out the window?
Trump came in and everything became an emergency, right? In other words, did anything change with our tariff relationship with other countries or our trade situation between January 19th and January 20th?
Not that I can recall.
No, there was no change. It's just that suddenly he declared the trade deficits an emergency. And he said that he needed to declare tariffs against every country in the world. Now, one of his rationales is very simply that they're not trading as much with us as we're trading with them. Is that a reasonable objection? What do you think, Ashlyn?
I would say no, not a reasonable objection, just based on the fact that with a global economy, different countries have different needs and desires that others can't meet. For example, we clearly are going to get more coffee beans from places that are known for producing coffee beans than those places would get coffee beans from us or any other item. So, you know,
Yeah, it's supply and demand.
Bad. It's just a part of a global economy.
It's supply and demand. So Ashlyn, let me give you this example. I like to shop at Trader Joe's because it's so cheap. It is amazingly cheap, you know, and then you go there and sometimes they have Trader Harold's or Trader Ming's or Trader Jose's, which is also cheap. So every week on Thursday night, my wife and I go to Trader Joe's and we buy $100 worth of groceries, right? And on my way out, I say to Trader Joe's, hey, by the way, I just produced this book, The National Security Constitution in the 21st Century. Why don't you buy, Trader Joe's, $100 worth of my book? What would they say to me?
We are only interested in your dollars and cents for the things you buy. We're not here to trade. You're trading your money for our goods.
Yeah, we have no interest in your book. You know, you're a pointy-headed academic. So what do I say to that? I'm not going to shop at Trader Joe's anymore?
I mean, that is your choice in a free market, but it wouldn't be a very
So
choice if you enjoy shopping there and you find it valuable and a good use of your resources.
who's getting hurt by my shopping at Trader Joe's?
Publix, Walmart.
Other stores. But if I decide to boycott Trader Joe's and go over to Whole Foods, am I going to lose out?
You will on your favorite items, but in the general sense, no.
Can I get as much for $100 at Whole Foods as I can get for Trader Joe's?
Not likely.
Not likely. So for me to stop shopping at Trader Joe's just because they won't buy my book because they have no demand for it is counterproductive. It hurts me. It doesn't hurt them. So what if I said, I'm going to impose a tariff? So it's more expensive for anyone to go shop at Trader Joe's. So if they want to go shop at Trader Joe's, everybody has to pay $1 more for every item than they would pay otherwise. Would people still shop at Trader Joe's?
Perhaps, but not without complaint about the increased cost of shopping there.
I just impose a tax on you of $1 for every time you shop at Trader Joe's. You still might go there. It's just that you're paying more for the exact same thing. And it was done on a whim, right? Now, what if I said, I will impose that tariff next week unless Trader Joe's makes a deal with me? And a week later, Trader Joe's, I go up to them, well, are you ready to make a deal with me? You know, it's like, if you don't make a deal with me, I'll shoot myself in the head. Are they going to make a deal with me?
They don't have to, you know?
Well, go pound sand.
Yeah.
You're an idiot. You're an idiot. You're trying to blackmail us into buying your book, and we're just not going to do it. So you're raising the price on yourself, and you're raising the price on other customers who are on your side. But that doesn't hurt us. And we're not going to make a deal with you. Now, obviously, if there's a massive amount, they might consider doing something. But this is an approximation of what Trump is doing. The idea that I'm going to have an equal trade balance with Trader Joe's, where they buy as many copies of my book as I buy cheap stuff from Trader Joe's, is a fantasy, right? All that happens by my imposing tariffs is that people pay effectively taxes to get the exact same stuff. Now, obviously, that might bring demand down, because it costs more, but it doesn't improve anybody's welfare. So why does it trigger inflation, Ashlyn?
People change their spending habits to adjust to the changing costs, and it ultimately leads to imbalance, which can lead to inflation. When there's good supply and demand in a free market, prices match what they are meant to. But when you add in factors that mess with that free market, it can result in price increases, among other things that aren't good in a free market. Of course, there's good amounts of inflation in any market, but you don't want to tip the balance too far.
Yeah, so I'll give you a good example. You know, my poor wife and I, every week we spend $100 on groceries. But under this new regime, we have to pay $150 on groceries, but we get $100 worth of groceries and pay $50 of tariffs. That $50 is lost to other things we might want to buy, right? And so for those $50, we don't go to the movies. We don't do, we don't go to concerts. Our other spending, discretionary spending, is reduced. You know, if we're going to get a babysitter, we wouldn't go out. All kinds of things would pay the price. So a couple of things happen. One is our utility is reduced because we're getting less for the same amount of money. And secondly, prices go up, right? And so it's as if, you know, there's inflationary pressures now that everything used to cost a little bit, costs a lot. I'll give you another example. We have a car, a Toyota Camry. This is a true story, which we bought in 2002. So my wife said, why don't we buy another Toyota Camry? I said, they're too expensive. Let's buy a Hyundai because I'm Korean. She said, okay. And then Trump imposes tariffs. So are we going to get a Hyundai now, Ashlyn?
No, you might ride that 2002 Camry a little longer.
Yeah. Will I buy an American car?
You may be more encouraged to, but I don't think the price would be reduced much because American car manufacturers are still importing steel from places with tariffs on them. And the idea that these car manufacturing factories could pop up with the lightning speed of tariffs imposed is also a huge problem. It doesn't
All car prices are going up. Don't take my word for it. Just try to buy a car. But what we're doing for now is we're just riding our own lousy car for another couple of years. Because
I'm actually in the same boat. I also have a old Toyota Camry that's paid off and will be driven until it can no longer be driven.
what year is it?
2012. So I actually I have
Ours
a
is
larger
2000
buffer.
Ours is 2002. I'll trade it with you. I'll trade mine for yours because mine's actually a better car. If you take that, you know, but that's the kind of thing that Trump wants to do. Is he's imposing these constraints on people. Now, do I feel more free?
I don't feel more free.
Yeah. Do I feel like it's helping us on the economy?
No.
No. And by the way, back to you, Misha. Is there an emergency now?
Well, now there is.
Who created the emergency?
Trump.
Trump. Why don't we declare emergency against Trump? No, it's amazing. Isn't it amazing? There was no emergency. There was no external threat. So let's go back to, let's see, Shivani. Can I ask you this question? What do you think constitutes a genuine emergency? Like somebody comes up to you and says, Shivani, we've got an emergency. And what would be for you the criteria of what might constitute an emergency?
Well, under the National Emergencies Act, I'm pretty sure the requirements.
No. Just don't do it legally. Just do it common sense.
Okay.
Like how about this? Shivani, I'm supposed to teach a class today, but I can't. Why? I've got an emergency. And you say, what's your emergency? I've got to run an errand, or I've got to go walk my dog, or something like that. What would you say to that?
A sudden, unforeseen.
Yes. Sudden, unforeseen, unexpected, threatening.
Yeah, that poses some risk to, if you can't go take care of this emergency, you're at risk of some harm.
So I need additional powers to deal with the emergency. And then if I deal with the emergency effectively using the additional powers, the emergency powers, I can make it go away. And then we return to normal life, right?
Yeah.
So why is that not the case with the emergencies being declared by Trump? Let me go back to you, Kari.
Because they're self-created emergencies. If it wasn't for his own actions, there wouldn't be an emergency.
Yeah, one, they're not external threats. They're self-created threats. That's number one. Number two, they're not sudden.
Mm-hmm.
All that changed was that he became the president, and he decided to do it on a discretionary basis. They're not unusual and extraordinary, and he has no plan for ending these emergencies, right?
Mm-hmm.
What constitutes success in dealing with these? So with China, for example, he was setting tariffs, and then, he said, I'm going to pose a, 90% tariff, and then I'm going to pose a 60% tariff, and I'm going to pose a 40% tariff, and then I'll settle for a 30% tariff, which is still larger than it was. Is that the result of negotiation, Kari?
No, it's a unilateral decision.
Yeah, he's just negotiating with himself, right? If you don't do
Not
this,
well.
if you don't do this next week, I'll shoot myself. And then you're not doing it. Okay, I'll shoot myself in 2 weeks. I'll shoot myself in 3 weeks. Now, the Chinese, as you can imagine, are quite bemused by this because what they do is they just wait, right? Now, who is making money off of this, though, Kari? Why would Charles Schwab or somebody else be making money off of this?
They're making money off of this because people are reacting to this emergency, so the money still goes somewhere else.
Yeah, so people can't invest because of this emergency uncertainty. If you don't know whether you're going to be paying 5 times as much for products, then you're not going to invest, and you're not going to hire another person, which is why this is one of the worst markets in the world for people leaving college, right? I was just with a bunch of very smart kids who have just graduated from college. None of them have jobs. Even the kids who did computer science, because it's also an age of AI. So across the board, people are saying, well, maybe I can just get some more programs to deal with this. I'm not going to hire another kid or train them or anything else. Now, this is leading to a bad jobs report because the growth rate of jobs is lower than it was. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports we do now have an emergency of a sort, which is that people aren't getting jobs. So what happened with that guy, Kari?
What happened with
the guy who heads the Bureau of Labor Statistics, who said that the job numbers were dropping?
Now his job's in trouble.
He got fired.
Yeah.
His bureau reported the truth accurately, and then Trump said, we're going to fire you. So now we have an emergency, and we don't even have a capacity to determine whether the emergency exists, is accurate, or will go away. So we're in a state of permanent emergency and a claim of permanent emergency power, which allows the president to invoke these powers to swamp the powers of Congress. Now, let's see, Andres, let me ask you this. Can you hear me, Andres?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Now, this is Congress's power, right? They delegated it to the president if he invoked the national emergency. So are they powerless in this situation?
No, but I mean...
If you were a Democratic member of Congress and your district is suffering, what would you do?
I mean, you would try to enact more laws, but I mean, essentially, if he's circumventing those laws that you're creating, it becomes a little bit more difficult.
Could you enact a law saying there is no emergency?
Essentially, yeah, you can outline more, or you can outline ways in which emergencies couldn't be an emergency.
You could adopt a law in which you say this is what constitutes an emergency in Congress's view. That's how you gain access to these international emergency economic powers. But to do that, how many votes would you need to get it through?
A majority.
A majority of each house, right? It's 51 senators and 235, half of 235 members of the House. So why is that insufficient? Or why can't you get that?
There's always a dispute. So, I mean, because Republicans and Democrats will never see eye to eye, it becomes a little more difficult to get that back.
It's even easier than that. Do the Democrats have a majority in either house?
No.
No. And even if they adopted it by a majority, say they got a couple of Republicans to swing on their side, what would Trump do?
Veto it.
And then you need what to override it?
A supermajority.
2/3. So if you don't have 51%, you don't have 67%, right? So they can't do it. Okay, so in theory, Congress can take the power back, but they're not doing it. What's interesting to me is not so much that they're not doing it, they're not even trying. More than that, people whose districts are being harmed who are in Trump's party aren't doing anything either, even though they're going home. And what are they facing now in the midterms, Andres? Why are they not having town hall meetings?
Not sure.
Well, if you were in a Republican red district and you went in and you start defending Trump, what are they going to say? How come I can't buy my Hyundai? How come I can't shop at Trader Joe's? You know, how come everything's more expensive? I was supposed to have a president who was supposed to reduce inflation, make me more free, make my life a little bit better than it was under the previous administration, and it's not happening. And they're screaming at these guys. Plus, they're firing people in the government. So if I'm trying to get my Social Security, I wait online forever and nobody answers the phone. And also, they sent in Elon Musk of Doge, and they fired all these people who had been working for the government for years. And it was done in such a ridiculous way, it just made everybody's life miserable. So, and then they fired Elon Musk. So, in theory, there should be some, it is what they call a collective action problem, because people should see their way to responding collectively. And there used to be leaders of the Congress who would go and talk to the president and tell him stuff he didn't want to hear. But apparently there is no such person now. Okay, so let's talk about the courts. If the president is, so there are three questions. Why is the president unconstrained? This is different. Three things are different. The president is increasingly unconstrained. Congress is increasingly less of a check, and the courts are increasingly a rubber stamp. When you have the president acting unconstrained, Congress doing nothing to check him, and the courts rubber stamping, then Alexander, who has all the power?
President, the executive.
Yeah, the shared power model collapses, and the power flows to the president to do everything. And that's essentially what's happening, and that's the thesis of my book. It is not a personality story, although personalities matter. It is an institutional story. And it's not a tale of one branch, it's a tale of three branches. The president overreaches, Congress acquiesces, and the courts rubber stamp or defer. And the net result is that the balance of powers envisioned by Youngstown gets converted into the executive power theory of Curtis Wright. So let's take a couple of other examples from the reading. What happened in Trump versus JGG, which is the Alien Enemies Act case before Chief Judge Boasberg? What's happening to Boasberg? Was he your contemporary, Michael?
No, we didn't overlap.
Yeah, he's a couple of years behind you, but he's almost as tall as Michael Frumkin. That's pretty tall. His housemate was a guy named Brett Kavanaugh, but they're quite different in their leanings. Kavanaugh is more conservative and Boasberg is more liberal, but he's not an extreme liberal. He's a moderate, was always my view. Okay, so what happens is the government invokes something called the Alien Enemies Act. What's that? And when has it been used before? Jake?
It was used only in, I believe, the 1700s. And it's when the country is under attack from some sort of enemy. And then he used it on Venezuela, I believe.
In the middle, they used it against Japanese Americans in World War II. To do what?
Internment camps.
Yeah, thinking that they were doing what?
Protecting national security.
They thought the Japanese Americans were spotted.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay, sorry. I misunderstood the question.
So why do they put them in internment camps?
Means of control.
Yeah. This is the notorious Korematsu case. What was the problem with that use of the Alien Enemies Act, Jake?
Well, it's dehumanizing to Japanese people, and it is, I'd say, un-American and unconstitutional as well.
Does it treat them as equals?
Absolutely not.
Does it give them equal protection of the laws?
Of course not.
Are they a suspect classification because of their race and nationality?
In this case, absolutely.
Yeah, so if you took constitutional law, which you clearly have, you can do that if it's narrowly construed to meet a compelling governmental interest. What was the compelling governmental interest they claimed
In World War II or currently?
in World War II?
National security because of the war with the Japanese and Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, and they had a report, and one of the reports was that Japanese people on the West Coast were going out with lamps to signal to Japanese subs offshore. Later, it turned out that those people were actually going out to urinate in outhouses. They weren't doing anything of that kind. So what happened is a group of American citizens, based on their race and ethnicity, are detained without due process against their will on the ground that they're actually alien enemies. And the key words that they use is invasion or predatory incursion. So in the, Jake, you're doing well here. In the Korematsu context, the Japanese-American context, was there a claim or concern of invasion?
You can make that argument with Pearl Harbor, I believe.
Yeah, there was an attack at Pearl Harbor. Some people thought the next thing was going to be California. And so you have to prepare for an invasion. That's why they invoked it. And by the way, the people who did Korematsu included people like Earl Warren, governor of California, William O. Douglas, Franklin Roosevelt. So these are civil libertarians, or people who claim to be civil libertarians, nevertheless signed off on this. But in March of 2015, Trump declares a claim against the Alien Enemies Act against Tren-de-Aragua. What is Tren-de-Aragua, Jake?
I don't know.
Yeah, anybody? Misha, you still got your hand up, but I don't know if you're raising your hand.
No, it's a new hand up. Drug cartel.
Drug cartel. Oh, good. Ellen has also raised her hand. So let me ask her, what are the characteristics of Tren-de-Aragua?
I mean, from what I know, it's just like a Venezuelan criminal organization that's been sought after by Trump. And he's alleging that they've brought a lot of opioids and other drugs into the country. And he's kind of gone after them for a lot of RICO charges as well.
Yeah, and how do you know that somebody's a member of Tren-de-Aragua?
I mean, from what I remember, there's like specific markers that...
Yeah, they have certain tattoos.
Yeah.
And they wear Chicago Bulls baseball caps.
Yeah.
Now go outside in Coral Gables. Would you see some kid walking by with a tattoo?
Probably, yeah.
Would you see people wearing a Chicago Bulls hat?
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked.
Not if they know it's good for them.
If they've read this case, then maybe not. But yeah, I mean, if it's not lay knowledge, then I think it's a very common thing to wear. And I think tattoos are also very common.
So their identifying characteristics are wildly overbroad, right?
Right.
It might sweep in people from Tren-de-Aragua, but it might sweep in people who are University of Miami students just on their way to class. Now, back to you, Jake. Is there an invasion? Is Tren-de-Aragua...
Currently, no.
So how can you invoke the Alien Enemies Act against Tren-de-Aragua? Is the drug cartel invading us?
No.
Yeah, so what are they doing, according to Trump?
Trump is saying that this is an emergency, but under the definition that we established earlier, you'd make the argument that it probably is not an emergency.
Yeah, so this is a different kind of claim. The Alien Enemies Act doesn't say emergency, unlike the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. But the claim is that the invasion is creating a basis for the invocation of emergency powers. Now let's just take the latest. Let's go to you, Bo. There you are out in the outer atmosphere. What happened in the last couple of weeks about these Venezuelan speedboats heading toward Miami, where you guys are? What did they do with them?
Well, Trump has been kind of unilaterally just saying that he wants to, shoot them down and basically sinking them. So you can kind of make the tail wag the dog and say, we're the next closest thing to a declared war. I need to invoke this.
Yeah, so he's just blowing them out of the water. Now, you guys have watched Miami Vice, right? I mean, you live in Miami. I don't know which version you watched, the Don Johnson version or the Colin Farrell version or whatever. But when drug boats are coming to the U.S., what is the cigarette boats? What's the normal response? Law enforcement or war? Well,
law enforcement.
Law enforcement. So what do? You interdict the boats and you seize the drugs, right? And you arrest the guys and you put them on trial. Now, here's a big one, Bo. When the drug enforcement agents get on the boat to interdict the drugs, can they just shoot the guys?
Well, no, but they seem to be doing so anyway.
Yeah, before Trump, they would arrest them because the crimes with which they could be charged, even the most extreme case, are not capital offenses. So what is the possible basis for which they're blowing them out of the water?
I would imagine to induce what could be called a war.
Well, to scare them so they're not coming, right? Now, the New York Times reported that the first boat of 11 was retreating. So look at this. No identification, no proven threat, no capital offense, no declaration of war, no consultation with Congress of any kind, no warning, no attempt to capture. They just killed them. By the way, do we know who any of those people were?
No.
Do we know that they were members of Tren de Aragua?
No.
No. And more than that, there were 11 guys on the first boat. Anybody know when a drug cartel is normally, when you watch Miami Vice, or you can tell I watch a lot of television, do they have 11 guys on the boat, Ellen? These are what they call go fast cigarette boats, right?
Right. There's usually only like 2 or 3.
There are 2 guys, right? They want to go fast. Most of the boat is filled with stuff. The fact there are 11 people, the only thing they said about it is that there are 11 people. How do we know they weren't refugees?
That's what I was thinking. I was really thinking it was a refugee incident.
Yeah, we don't know that we don't have no idea whether they were Tren de Aragua or not. And then there's no claim of self-defense because they were fleeing. You know, once they saw the plane in the air, they turned around, started fleeing. So this was about as blatant an act, a lawless act, as a president has done in my lifetime, with no justification, no clarification, or anything like that. Now, Michael mentioned 9/11. What's the difference between that and the use of drones against or targeted killing against Osama bin Laden? Are they the same? Natalie?
I don't know if you can see the electronic hands, but some people have been raising their hands electronically.
Oh, I can't see. Is there somebody who got one up right now? I call you Alex. Michael is much more formal than I am.
Alex is fine.
Until they graduate.
I think the difference between the Venezuelan speedboat and the killing against Osama bin Laden, the fact you had a named target, and there was an ongoing operation to find and capture him. Congress had also weighed in on this. This was viewed as wholly legitimate by both Congress and the executive branch, whereas the actions against the speedboat were, again, I mean, you just went through the list. There was no consultation with Congress. There was no justification. There was no public target. It was just, these people look a little bit sketchy, so, we're going to drone strike them.
Yeah, so let's go back to Osama bin Laden. What did Osama bin Laden do?
Masterminded the 9/11 attacks.
Yeah, I mean, there's proof that
and other attacks as well.
He did multiple attacks on the United States, and he was responsible through his organization, Al-Qaeda, for the death of 3,000 innocent civilians in the heart of New York City, the destruction of its 2 largest buildings, and an attack on the Pentagon, and an attack on a plane that crashed in Pennsylvania. And by the way, what was bin Laden then doing? Was he trying to make a peace treaty?
No, he was not. He was continuing his efforts to, conduct attacks against.
He was planning other attacks, right? In fact, how do we know? They had an attack on with a shoe bomb, they had an attack with a cartridge bomb. These were thwarted by various means. But there was no doubt that what he was doing was planning attacks. That was his reason for living. He didn't want to be the leader of a rebel nation. He wanted to kill civilians in the United States. That was his job. That's what he thought was his mission in life. Now, why is that different from these nameless guys on the boat, Alex?
The nameless individual.
Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, says these guys are delivering fentanyl, and that's just like bombing the World Trade Center.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, just the fact that there is fentanyl in these products, and the fact that fentanyl is known to be deadly, I mean, the incentive for them was a profit-based one. It was not, they were not doing this with the intent to kill people. even though they obviously knew of the risk and paid them no mind, but still, the intent of this operation was to generate a profit, not to kill for a political end.
We don't even know that, do we? You don't even know there was any fentanyl on the boats.
That as well, right?
Right. And so when we talk about a war on drugs, do we literally mean using tools of warfare to stop drug smugglers?
Now we do, but traditionally, no, we've not meant that.
It's law enforcement. We've traditionally used law enforcement tools. So now they've quite literally converted ways of thwarting drug smugglers into a war against drug smugglers through a set of arbitrary strikes without explanation, without consultation with Congress. And on the basis of things like, now the Alien Enemies Act is a basis to detain, but with regard to these guys on the Venezuelan boat, they said that they were foreign terrorists and they had been so designated under the Foreign Terrorist Organization's designation provisions. Is that a justification, Alex?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? You broke up for a second.
Yeah, I designate you, Alex, as a foreign terrorist. Can I then kill you at whim?
No, I'm still entitled to due process.
Yeah, you're entitled to due process. And what FTO designations do is they allow me to freeze your bank account and engage in
Or put me
economic.
on a fly list, or right, but not to kill me.
All kinds of things. No, you get due process. So, this well exceeded any previous invocation of these authorities. There is a requirement that was imposed by both Obama and Biden, the so-called playbook, which required capture, if possible, before you use lethal options. Third, that there has to be a near certainty that you're not killing civilians. And fourth, you have to know with certainty that the person who is being targeted is about to launch another attack. Did they know any of these things, Alex, with regard to these guys on the boats?
They did not.
They did not. And then a couple days later, they killed 3 more guys on the boats, again with no explanation. Now, this is a different kind of invocation of emergency power. So we're now seeing 3. First, triggering of delegated authority under the International Emergency Powers Act to impose taxes in the form of tariffs at the whim of the president. Now, I mentioned Charles Schwab. Let me go back to you, Ashlyn. If Trump tells a friend of his, guess what? I'm going to threaten to impose tariffs tomorrow, but I'm just letting you know, in a week I'll do it, not tomorrow. What will Charles Schwab do?
Everyone buys and buys as the stock drops, and then inevitably it bounces back, and the wealthy investors who are paying attention and maybe got the heads up and are glued to their phones watching the stocks and options, they have made a lot of money. Others have not been so fortunate.
So why is that? What's insider trading?
Illegal.
It's illegal under the securities exchange laws. But here, Trump even said this. He said, Charles Schwab will make a lot of money. In other words, I tip off my friends and they make money from my decision whether or not to impose tariffs, where, poor people like you and me have to pay twice as much at Trader Joe's. So the economic impacts are clear. The corruption impacts are clear. And then you have the lawsuit brought by Ilya Somin and others. And I signed the brief on behalf of the legal scholars, most of whom are conservative. Now, I signed because, I believe that Congress has the power over taxes and Congress has the power over foreign commerce. And that the brief that was written by those guys, particularly Mike McConnell, former judge, I thought was right on the money. And I don't do things because of politics. I do it because of whether it's legally correct or not. So that's one source. The second source is without expressly invoking emergency power, but calling it an invasion and treating it, like Shivani said, as a emergency, sudden, unusual. But in fact, there is no declaration of war against Venezuela. There is no declaration of war against Trinidad. There is no identification. All that's happening is a shift from a law enforcement paradigm to a war paradigm. And then third, we're seeing the Venezuelan boats, which is actually not just detaining, but use of force. So just going back to what happened with JGG, just so we understand that case and what happened.
Before we do that, can I, the risk of derailing you, ask a couple questions about invasions?
Of course.
So it's a key word in the Alien Enemies Act. And there are two questions, right? One is the issue of the definition of invasion or predatory incursion, and the other is how on earth a court can actually review those assertions. Now, sometimes it's going to be blitheringly obvious, right? An army marches down from Canada, we know it's an invasion. Sometimes it's probably blitheringly equally obvious, a Venezuelan boat is not, a cigarette boat is not an invasion. But I came up with a couple other examples I wanted to just try out on you, both because I think they're closer cases and also they might cause courts troubles. So one is, in the past month or so, there have been a lot of reports coming out of Europe that the Russian government has been recruiting persons in multiple countries, natives, citizens, to conduct various forms of sabotage against both civilian and occasionally military significant targets. Suppose we had evidence that was happening here. Would that justify an invocation of the Alien Enemies Act? And if a president made such an invocation, how, as a practical matter, could a court review it?
Well, there are two questions you're asking, Michael. One is, are these people saboteurs who are actually being hired to carry out military missions in the United States? That's the basis of the Nazi saboteurs case in Ray Quirin. The second question, though, that you ask is, and it's the question of discussion on this assignment, is this assertion reviewable? And if it is reviewable by a court, what is the standard? Now, we have espionage rules too, right? So let's take a case similar to what you're describing. And I ask any of you, have the Russians been poisoning people in London or in the outer parts of the UK? Yeah, Bo, you're nodding.
Yeah, they have.
Yeah. So if you capture those guys, what's your response? Do you watch any of these crime dramas, BritBox, Shetland, Prime Suspect? They're all the same. This deputy superintendent, so-and-so, deputy inspector, whatever, New Scotland Yard. They pick up these guys, MI5. If you find out that the Russians are doing this, do you just go up and kill them?
No, I imagine you'd probably, take them to Brussels if you can, or you would, I don't think it would qualify as an invasion. It's an act of war, no doubt, but it's not an invasion.
Yeah, it's the opposite. It's a act of espionage, and it's a covert action. Now, at a certain point, you might say it's happening at such a large scale that it amounts to an invasion, or what the term of the Alien Enemies Act is, predatory incursion. Is that what immigrants are doing, trying to come to the United States?
No.
No, they want to live here. They want to go to school. They want their kids to get jobs. They're not trying to invade the country. So the question is that what Tren de Aragua is trying to do? And how big is Tren de Aragua?
I think we haven't really heard about Tren de Aragua as like this major national threat until it was decided that that's who we can point to in, the most recent election.
Yeah. Did anybody even hear of Tren de Aragua before January 20th? Suddenly it's the greatest threat of all time. Again, that's a new creation. So the question for Michael is that there has to be some scale or size or some suggestion of a concerted plan. Like if you have an invasion, it suggests that there's some plan to come in and overthrow the government.
Let me ask you a harder one then. Supposing, and there are a lot of facts that this is actually happening, we think that one of our foreign adversaries, or maybe two of them, are setting up giant botnets to flood the United States with propaganda designed to sow hatred and division and perhaps ultimately set off a civil war. That's the hope.
Or how about to steal the election and turn it in favor of Donald Trump?
Even so. Although I think that's looking backwards, not forwards, I hope.
No, but let me ask you that question, because if these bots are doing that, if that's an invasion, why wasn't an invasion then?
Why not? Indeed. That would be the hypo is suppose the president says it is. Can the courts realistically review that? in any meaningful way, or do they have to accept that at least if there's doubt?
Okay, so Michael's asking good questions as always, but the two first questions should be, number one, is there an objective standard by which to determine an emergency? Number two, are we close to what we think would be that standard happening now? And then number three, who is entitled to make this construction or interpretation? So number one, Misha, you had your hand up, so I want to return to you. Would you say that the claim of emergency with regard to Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan boats, or the tariffs are plausible claims?
For the purposes of the National Emergencies Act, possibly Tren de Aragua, although probably not. The tariffs, absolutely not. However, for the purposes of the Alien Enemies Act, they're not a nation or government.
Right.
It feels like a deal breaker to me first.
Now, if you're an originalist, you can actually go back to the legislative history of the Alien Enemies Act, which is talking about British invasions or militias, or sometimes they talk about marauding groups, but they're not talking about bands of criminals or outlaws. So if you read the opinion by Judge Charles Breyer, Steve Breyer's brother, he rejects the use of the Alien Enemies Act as on its face inapplicable to the current immigration situation, but he doesn't address it in the context of the current drug situation. So just to review what happened with JGG, and then I want to turn to Vasquez Perdomo. In the JGG case, they just grabbed these guys and then they started shipping them back by airplane. And what did Boasberg do, the judge? Yes, Ellen.
He had issued TROs, halting removals, and he basically ordered the planes to return.
Yeah, a temporary restraining order operates for 10 days or 14 days, depending on where you are.
Yeah.
It's not appealable, and it restrains the government from completing the action that it's trying to complete if they're the defendant, right? What was the purpose of Boasberg restraining this? It's a form of injunctive action. What was he trying to assess?
He was trying to protect due process.
Two things. He's trying to protect due process. Did they get any kinds of notice or proof of why they're being shipped out? And secondly, is this a valid invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, right?
No, I mean, I also perceive it as a procedural violation of the act.
Yeah, if the president can ship people out so that they're not in court to litigate these issues, then it never gets litigated. All he's saying is, I want these people to stay here. Now, what happened is that the government said, no, they're on a plane. We're sending them back. And he basically says, the temporary restraining order blocks you from sending them back. And then what happened next, Ellen?
Essentially, the higher court, they kind of limited the scope of the TRO. So now, like, the non-citizens that were subject to removal, they weren't entitled to like a total due process hearing, but they were entitled to a notice to seek habeas relief, which is a lot more limited than like a full due process litigation.
So habeas relief entitles them to what?
I mean, it allows them to basically file like a petition to say like what the government is improperly going after me.
You're almost there. You're to challenge the legality or length of their detention. In other words, they shouldn't be being detained because the government has no legal authority to hold them. That's all that Boasberg was trying to determine. They're sending them back on a plane. And what the government makes a big deal about is you're telling a plane to stop in flight. Is that inherently wrong, Ellen? You say a single federal judge is telling a plane to stop in flight.
I mean, I think our government has done a lot crazier things. So I think even like the plane can land and then come back with the passengers still on board. I just think in the context of like, I uphold due process very seriously. And these people were to be sent to CCOT, which is, you know, that's a very big deal. And to have any sort of notice to be heard before that, especially before getting sent to like one of, the highest talked about prisons on earth that can violate people's rights. I don't see where there would be an issue with it, but I do think it's something that like Congress also should be involved with.
So by the way, very good, Ellen. What's going to happen to them if they get to CCOT?
Nothing good, probably.
They'll probably be tortured, right? Can you send them back to torture?
I mean, Trump sure thinks that he can.
That's illegal. You can't send people back to be tortured. That's a specific provision of U.S. Immigration law, non-refoulement to torture, non-return to torture. Now, what was interesting was they claimed that a district judge could not stop a plane taking people, immigrant detainees. I knew that was false because in 1994, with a group of lawyers from Miami, led by Roberto Martinez of the Colson law firm, we blocked a plane that was taking Cuban Americans back to Guantanamo. And we went before Judge Atkins in the Southern District of Florida, and Bob got a TRO, and the plane was told to stop. But when I got there, which is I was coming from Connecticut to join the case, Bob said to me, he's a wonderful guy, we got the judge to stop the plane from taking off. And I said to him, oh, no. Ellen, why did I say, oh, no?
I don't know.
Because the governor is going to make the whole issue about whether a single unelected federal judge can stop a U.S. military plane from taking off. And they're going to turn that into a Curtis Wright case. How do you do that? Who's the sole organ of the government and foreign affairs, according to Curtis Wright?
The sovereign power lies with the executive branch.
The president. And in this vast external realm, can the courts intervene and block the president from moving around military planes?
If we're looking at it through the lens of Curtis Wright, no.
No, and that's within the scope of the commander-in-chief power, they'll say. I said to Bob, we got suckered. That's what they were trying to do with Boasberg. They were trying to sucker him into the exact same thing, which is they wanted him to issue orders blocking a bunch of planes, and then they could take it out on Boasberg. Now, Boasberg's no dummy, so he very carefully said, I want an hour-to-hour report about what you did when you got my orders, and particularly what people in Washington did when they got the orders that these people were not to be returned during the pendency of the litigation. And if, for example, someone sitting in the Defense Department got an order and a plane was on the runway, what should they do?
I would say that they shouldn't take off. They should, do their due diligence. And if the government really thinks that they're correct, they write a report and they submit a report with all of their reasonings, and they allow for a review before the plane takes off.
Yeah, so Boasberg is completely within his rights as a judge to tell a government official in Washington, don't send the plane, because I think it's illegal. And if they do violate his order, what can he do? What does he hold them in?
He can hold them in contempt.
Right, he can hold them in contempt. Now, he said, I have probable cause to hold them in contempt. So he didn't say they were in contempt. He just said, I'm about to hold them in contempt. So what did they do against Boasberg? They filed a judicial misconduct complaint against Boasberg, saying that he was making false threats by saying that the government might not obey his orders, and that for that reason, he should be sanctioned as a judge. He's the chief judge of the District of Columbia federal court. So, Ellen, they're trying to make this about Boasberg. Now, by the way, why did Boasberg suddenly start getting pizzas delivered to his house?
Well, that's just the nature of the government these days. When a judge makes a decision that isn't in favor to the Trump administration, they get pizzas sent to their door, and with that comes death threats.
Yeah, you all saw The Godfather, I hope. They deliver the guy's bulletproof vest with a fish in it. It says, Luca Brasi sleeps with the fishes. What message are they delivering to you?
Basically saying, make the decision that best serves the department and the president, or else.
Or you sleep with the fishes.
Yeah.
In other words, by sending a pizza to your house, you're saying, I know where you live. And by the way, it could be a pizza or it could be a bomb. Next time it could be a bomb. Or next time it could be a hitman. We know where you live. And that's a way of saying, do what we want. Now, if this seems like mafiosi style tactics, that's pretty close to it. So here you have a battle in which something about whether it was an emergency or not suddenly becomes an issue about whether a judge is staying within the scope of its power. And then they threaten to impeach Boasberg, at which point, who crops up suddenly but John Roberts, who says, let's not talk about impeachment. It's a 2-sentence thing. Now, did that surprise people? Yeah, because John Roberts usually doesn't say anything. It turns out he's a friend of Boasberg. So this is an interesting question. Will he still be a friend of his when this is over? Boasberg's also a friend of Kavanaugh. He was his roommate. That's another.
I can't resist asking another question to follow on from that.
Sure.
Which is, anything you can say about the Supreme Court's use of the shadow docket in the Boasberg cases or in other ones like GGG or No versus Vasquez-Perdomo?
Yeah, let's talk about.
I'm sure you know, but the students may not know. There's been a big debate about the precedential effect of those orders. And classically, they weren't seen as precedential. Recently, the Supreme Court justices have chided the district courts for not reading them that way, only get pushback from judges at all levels, including retired Justice Breyer.
Yeah, so who wants to tell me about Vasquez-Perdomo? Let's see, who hasn't spoken here? I'll give you a chance if you want. Emily or Jackson?
Sure. Essentially, it was ICE agents and DHS agents were stopping individuals in Southern California based on where they were working and speaking Spanish and what they looked like. And a district court entered an injunction at TRO stopping them for doing that. And the Supreme Court said that those factors are considered reasonable suspicion that they're an illegal immigrant and can be temporarily detained and questioned to determine their status.
Yeah, so this is a very complex matter procedurally, so let's go through it. Is there an emergency here, Emily?
No.
No. So it's not dissimilar to the tariff emergency. The emergency created is one that Trump has created. We have too many immigrants. Now, by the way, could some of these people be on work visas, or as Sotomayor points out, could they be U.S. citizens?
Yes.
Yeah, but the ruling is about whether ICE agents have authority to stop and frisk them. What does that mean?
Whether they have reasonable suspicion. I mean, it has to do with the Fourth Amendment, whether they have reasonable suspicion to detain someone if they believe they're committing a crime.
Yeah, very good, Emily. So if I'm an ICE agent and I see 10 people walking down the street, and 2 of them are Latino looking, and they're speaking Spanish, and I decide to stop those 2 and not the other 10, is that okay?
No.
No. Why? It's racial profile. Is that equal protection of the laws?
No.
Do you have reasonable suspicion that they're committing a crime just because they're speaking Spanish? No. So for that reason, in Vasquez-Perdomo, 2 district judges enjoined this practice. Now, here's the trick question. What did the circuit court do, Emily? 2 district judges granted.
Wait, sorry, repeat that.
What did the Ninth Circuit do? It's a trick question. Nothing.
Yeah.
What did the government do instead?
The government appealed.
They went to the Supreme Court seeking a stay. What does that mean?
That they wanted a pause while the appeal was pending, while the Supreme Court made a decision.
They want to let ICE agents keep using racial profiling and Spanish speaking as a factor in stopping people while the litigation is going on. By the way, the preliminary injunction hearing is on Wednesday. It's just on Wednesday. Now, would the government be prejudiced? So by the way, in the stay, there are 2 things: balance of harms. Who gets prejudiced more, the government or the individuals?
The individual.
And the individuals clearly get prejudiced more. And then the second question is there a substantial likelihood of success on the merits? Namely, is there a substantial likelihood that they're going to grant the stay? And the argument that there's a substantial likelihood they're going to grant the stay is based on what the case law is. Does the case law permit racial profiling in law enforcement?
No, it does not.
No, it does not. Let me ask you this, Emily. Does the Supreme Court let racial factors be used to pick who are the students at the University of Miami Law School?
No, it does not.
No, it does not. But what they say is until this matter is resolved, you can use racial factors as a basis for who you stop on the street. Now, Sonia Sotomayor makes two very important points. It's no surprise she's the only Latino professor. Hold on for 1 second.
So much as it pains me to defend the Supreme Court, the one suggestion has been that the reason for the decision was standing. Is this particularly hideous precedent, the LA chokehold case, Los Angeles versus Lyons. And the suggestion is that whatever you think of the merits, the plaintiffs might not have standing. I think that's probably a mistake here, but at least it's more credible than the equal protection failure.
Well, yeah, the Lyons argument is that the same people won't get stopped again. You know, it's like nobody has standing to challenge a chokehold because they won't be subject to the chokehold again. But let's set that aside for 1 second. What Sotomayor says is, if you're going to do this, you have to have a full briefing and oral argument. Do they have room for briefing and oral argument, Emily?
No.
They don't? How did they take the tariff case? When's the tariff case being heard?
Is it not set to be heard soon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Briefs are due on October 24th. It's going to be heard in November. If they wanted to accelerate this case, what could they do?
I mean, just accelerate it. They could hear it quick.
Grant cert on whatever issue they want, standing or on the racial profiling issue in stop and frisk and immigration cases, and order briefing and have the case argued in November. Do they have room in November?
Yes.
Yes. The year I clerked for the Supreme Court, there were 137 argued cases. Last year, there was something like 60. So they have plenty of room. Is this any less important than the tariff case?
No.
Yeah, in its own way, it's about the violation of individual rights. You know, it's about the violation of personal freedoms. It's about whether a whole class of people can be subjected to searches based on their race. Why isn't it just important? So problem number one is why they didn't grant full review and briefing, oral argument, and an opinion that would come out sometime in February. But the further question is, they were going to decide this without an opinion, I believe. And then Sotomayor writes an angry dissent of 22 pages, to which Kavanaugh appears to respond with a concurrence. So by the way, I credit Kavanaugh with writing the concurrence because at least explains their rationale. But when you read his concurrence, are you convinced by it, Emily? Why not?
Not at all. Because it's, at the end of the day, the factors that the ICE agents were stopping people on is racial profiling. And the Supreme Court has said in the past regarding reasonable suspicion, your race or ethnicity is not a basis for reasonable suspicion without anything further.
The most important question being is, should this be subjected to a snap judgment or full briefing and oral argument?
It should be subjected to a full briefing, if not a snap judgment that racial profiling is not a basis for reasonable suspicion.
Yeah, let's suppose they had full briefing and oral argument and 100 police forces came in and said, we don't need racial profiling based on race. We don't racially profile based on Latino, Spanish-speaking quality. The question would be, why does ICE need it, right? In other words, you could get a lot from setting it for expedited hearing and oral argument, which would only delay the decision by a couple of months. So why don't you do that? In fact, the shallowness of Kavanaugh's opinion shows the very reasons why you would want him to hear more from more people before he issued this. Meanwhile, Sotomayor says we now have two classes of Fourth Amendment rights, which is if you're Latino or you speak Spanish, even if you're a citizen, you have to carry your documents. And, you are subject and vulnerable to searches. Now, by the way, does it matter, Emily, if you're a green card holder?
Does it matter?
Yeah, whether you can be stopped or not.
No.
Yeah, students have been stopped in Columbia University, Tufts, a lot of different universities, and they had status and their visas are just revoked. This is one of the features of this administration, the 3 Ds: delegalize, detain, and deport. They say anyone who's in illegal status can be immediately deported, and that even if they have the status which used to give you a kind of assurance, like a green card, they can revoke the green card on foreign policy grounds. What are those foreign policy grounds? Emergency. So that's where emergency comes here. Somehow the reason is that what if it turns out that what they're doing, which creates the emergency, is they're giving a speech on campus at University of Miami in favor of Palestinian rights? Is that an emergency?
No, but according to this government, I mean, yeah, it can be considered an emergency considering what they've labeled terrorist organizations.
So how about this? What if you have a professor who's Spanish-speaking Latino, but he has a green card? Let's call him Jaime Kimmel. Jaime Kimmel, and he goes out and he gives a speech on the lawn in which he says, I don't think that Donald Trump is very upset about the death of Charlie Kirk. Could you take away his green card and deport him?
I want to say no, you can't, but I feel like anything is possible right now.
Well, what we've seen is that a media company can be pressured by the fact of their government regulation to prevent somebody from speaking. And what we also see is that they're using immigration powers to delegalize people who used to have relatively secure immigration statuses and then launch into detention and then to move people around. So for example, a lot of people who are getting stopped in New York or Vermont are suddenly being sent to Louisiana. And then we have this new location near you guys, Alligator Alcatraz. What's that? Who wants to tell me about Alligator Alcatraz? Jackson, you haven't spoken yet.
I don't know much about it. I know that it's a detention center nearby.
Where is it? Where is it?
In the Everglades.
Yeah, so why did they put it there?
Because there's nothing there but swamp and, I don't know, bugs.
Because it's uninhabitable. Do you think that it meets the standards for humane treatment?
Certainly not, no.
Right. Who runs the Alligator Alcatraz? It's on a airfield, and they're building tents on the airfield. And it's being done as a joint project of the Federal Homeland Security run by Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, formerly governor of South Dakota. She certainly has never been in any place as hot as the Everglades. And then the Florida Department of Environmental Management. Now, this case was litigated in Miami before Judge Williams. Do you know, Jason, what they litigated over? Did they do an environmental impact statement before they set up Alligator Alcatraz?
No, I don't believe so.
They did not. And because they did not, she issued an order blocking the construction and completion of Alligator Alcatraz. Now, by the way, that's not a human rights or immigration ruling, but it's a clever ruling of environmental law because DeSantis's entity that is running Alligator Alcatraz supposedly is the Department of Environmental Management. So they're supposed to issue environmental impact statements before they do these things.
Well, the Court of Appeals said they didn't have to because there was nothing really federal there.
Well, that's an interesting question. Is it federal or not?
And it's hotly debated. Certainly the feds haven't paid a dime for it as far as we can tell.
Well, who are the prisoners going to be?
There is an agreement with the state for the state to take the prisoners. But does that in itself make it federal? I would say yes, but, you know, some of the private prison cases are a little more ambiguous. So,
well, where do you think these people are headed? Jackson, do you think that Alligator Alcatraz is their last stop?
I would imagine the goal is to deport these people. I think that's the end goal, but I'm not sure.
We don't know because it's not completed. They haven't started using it.
Oh, they've got hundreds of people in there. Oh, no, they've been using them. And the goal is to make people self-deport by making them so miserable they can't stand it. We have a lot of evidence to that effect. And at least one very suspicious death.
But as the blocking of this occurs, are they allowed to hold those people there?
Well, the district court told them to get everybody out of there on a schedule. And the appellate court put a hold on that. And I think it's now being appealed to the state Supreme Court, although I'm not actually sure what the current
right. So they have to sort out two issues that appear to be extraneous to the emergency issues and the detention issues. One is federal state authority, and then the other is compliance with environmental laws. But let me go back to Ellen, who was talking about CCOT prison. Here's the thing that hasn't really been discussed. How did CCOT prison come into existence? Do you know?
Like in the United States?
No, it's in El Salvador. And who runs it is Bukele.
Oh, well, isn't it the El Salvador government? Well, it's the U.S. government in Guantanamo Bay. Don't they run CCOT?
They're not in Guantanamo Bay. It's run by Bukele and El Salvadorian prison authorities. Now, some of those guys are actually on the Magnitsky list. Does anybody know what Magnitsky list is? Human rights violators who are not supposed to receive U.S. governmental money and are the subject of sanctions. Now, if you were in the government, one thing you would notice is that your former Senator Marco Rubio, now Secretary of State, went to El Salvador in February. That's like a week after the inauguration. And then Bukele came to the White House a couple of weeks later. Does that surprise you, Ellen, that the president of El Salvador comes to the Oval Office before the Prime Minister of England, the Prime Minister of Canada, the Prime Minister of France, the Prime Minister of...
No, it doesn't shock me at all. And I could be delusional, but I feel like I remember seeing in the news that the US government did in fact send money to CCOT.
Senator from Maryland concluded that it was at least 6 million and that possibly there's a contract for 11 million.
Yeah.
So and maybe going into pockets of people who are subject to Magnitsky sanctions.
Right. There's a certain agenda that, I think was being planned for a while. And I think it goes to show this was intentional, this was planned, and it's not just something that happened. I mean, this is something that like the US government under Donald Trump, there was intention behind this to be sending people to this prison.
Yeah, so Professor Frumkin has put it very well. There is a goal of self-deportation. There's a goal to use detention facilities for political theater. The claim is of an immigration emergency and threat posed by different groups. And then the solution is to send them to terrible places without concern for whether they'll be mistreated there. And if they block off one, they'll go to another. So there could be Guantanamo, where they said initially they opened 30,000 beds and then they didn't. Onshore places like Alligator Alcatraz, which is now in litigation. Trump wants to reopen the real Alcatraz in San Francisco, which is not even close. I went there with my family a couple of years ago. They're talking about Sudan, Ghana, Eswatini, right? Eswatini used to be Swaziland, the Kingdom of Swaziland. But the main goal here is to scare people so that they leave and that they're basically terrified by what's going to happen to them. And that includes people who are here on legal status. Now, what happened in Vasquez Perdomo was the grant of the stay. It could be described and has been described by some trying to defend it as, well, the Supreme Court just reviewed under the same standards and exercised its power under the shadow docket to let the government policy go forward while the case is under submission. And if and when it gets to the Supreme Court on full review, then they'll consider the policy afresh. But there's a problem with that analysis, and it concerns the past, present, and the future. With regard to the past, Emily, they are saying, we're not staying this because we don't think that it's going to come out in favor of the detainees on the merits. Now, when you look at it, it might be the argument that they don't have standing, or that the litigants for them don't have standing, or it could be the argument that they don't have a valid equal protection claim against the racial policy. But with regard to the past, they are now signaling how they plan to rule on the merits. And that's a very powerful signal to be sending with no briefing and oral argument other than a cert petition and a response by the government, which is a stay motion. With regard to the present, the shadow docket creates pockets of illegality that can continue across the country while litigation is going on. So let's tie this into the birthright citizenship case. What happened with the birthright citizenship case? Is birthright citizenship lawful, unlawful? And why did it come down to universal injunctions? Yeah, Bo.
I think the administration knew that it was never going to be considered lawful. It was an executive order ruling on constitutionality. The goal was for an injunction to be imposed so that they could challenge universal injunctions as a concept.
Yeah. So they said that the case turned on an issue of equity, which is, can you give complete relief to the parties? If not, you have to go back and get the case certified as a class action. That means that the order of Trump issuing birthright citizenship could be invalidated in one part of the country, but still continue in another part of the country until they get someone to litigate against it, which creates a patchwork of laws in which illegal behavior is being tolerated by the government because no one's gotten around to challenge it yet. Now, there are two responses to this, one which I wrote up in a blog post in Just Security, which is, why is the court deciding this based on old principles of equity when we live in an administrative state? And why isn't it being challenged as a violation of the Administrative Procedure Act? You know, for the birthright citizenship order to be contested or to be completed, 6 or 7 federal government agencies have to act. And if they're acting arbitrary, capricious, and in violation, not in accordance with law, someone who files a petition for administration vacatur, or vacating the order, can get a block whether they have a class action or not. So why are you deciding this case under ancient principles of equity when it actually involves whether New Deal agencies can function or not? But there's a separate question, which is birthright citizenship clearly established in the U.S. Constitution and its jurisprudence? Misha, what do you think?
Yes, it's unquestionably there. 5 Supreme Court cases, the plain language of the Constitution.
A federal statute which says the same thing, 14th Amendment. So when that case got to the Supreme Court, what should the Supreme Court have done?
Ignored the issue and just ruled on the merits that this is clearly what they've said 5 times now?
Yeah, they should have granted and summarily affirmed. They can expand the question and rule that the lower courts who ruled that the birthright citizenship order was illegal are clearly correct. Now, why can they do that without extended briefing and oral argument? You know, I've been the one arguing for briefing and oral argument. Why can they reaffirm birthright citizenship without briefing and oral argument and expedited hearing? Misha?
Because it's not rocket science, and then the plain language of the Constitution in this case is identical to several previous cases.
Yeah. If you're a textualist, it's in the text of the 14th Amendment. It's in the text of a statute passed by Congress and the president that says the exact words. It's in a Supreme Court case called U.S. versus Wong King Ark, and a bunch of cases that follow that. The court can say, this is a sufficient basis for us to declare this practice and this order illegal on its face. And we don't have to have extended argument to decide that. And we don't want pockets of illegality to persist around the country while people are trying to determine this, or while the government is playing games with whether or not its injunctions are broad or narrow. So here's the final catch. The stay order affects the future. How does a stay order affect the future? So, Natalie, let me ask you this question. The Supreme Court has now allowed the stop and frisk based on racial profiling to go on for several weeks. Suppose the case goes through preliminary injunction, suppose there's a ruling, suppose the circuit court hears it, suppose they argue and decide it, and then it comes back to the Supreme Court, and they finally hear it on review, and then they hear the merits of the case and decide it by next June. So it's September. The policy has been in effect for 9 months. How likely is it the Supreme Court going to strike down that policy in June?
I think it's unlikely.
Right. Why?
If we've had months and months of people being stopped and frisked, that's going to be a lot of people. And I also think if we're going to wait that long, it's unlikely that they're going to change their minds by then.
Well, more than that, who facilitated this? Who enabled this to happen for 9 months?
The government and Trump.
Not just the government, the Supreme Court.
Right. By staying the motion.
Has the Supreme Court been a neutral umpire, as John Roberts likes to say?
In this administration, no.
It put its thumb on the scales of stop and frisk. Does anybody really believe that 9 months from now they say, oh, now that we've looked at the case more closely, we made a mistake?
No.
It's over. So the stay affects the past, it affects the pockets of illegality in the present, and it affects the likelihood that in the future they will reject the argument on the merits, because to reject the argument on the merits is to condemn themselves for having allowed it to go on for 9 months. You know, John Roberts, I went to law school with John Roberts. He likes to say, I am a neutral umpire. I just call balls and strikes. Anybody here a baseball fan? What do they say? every umpire has his own strike zone, right? Some umpires don't give you the low strike. It's a fiction to believe that these judges are not taking positions. Now, up until this point, I always thought John Roberts cared a lot about one thing. John Roberts. And I thought that John Roberts cared about the reputation of the court that bears his name, the Roberts Court. But there's a real question as to whether he's reached a point where he realizes that the reputation of the Roberts Court is on the line. But it's on the line this year. And that's why Michael is correctly calling this a course about constitutional crisis. Because if the Supreme Court ends up essentially ruling for Trump in these major cases, then we now have proof that Trump can nullify the rule of law for his own administration. And then we've really gone the whole way. One of the things I say in my book is, up until now, we always had a president who had some internal sense of shame or some internal commitment to some notion of the rule of law. You know, even Richard Nixon, when he lost the Pentagon Papers case, they went and said, you have no hope, and he resigned. Trump decided, I'm never going to resign, right? So we are now in an extraordinary situation. And let's take one final example, the Trump immunity decision. What are some of the things that are protected from inquiry by the immunity ruling? They say, for example, discussions between the president and the attorney general are immune. So by the way, let's see, Misha, did you see the tweet that on Truth Social that Trump sent to Pam Bondi the other day about his political opponents? Oh, I see Emily is nodding. What did it say? Yeah, Emily or Misha?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what it said. If someone else wants to take that.
Yeah, Alex, go ahead.
I mean, it was basically like a directive to Pam Bondi saying you should investigate. You know, I know Adam Schiff was one of the names on there. There were a number of other people whom he said were guilty, and that, you know, justice needed to be served and probes into these people needed to be, you know, opened and moved on quickly.
Now, do you think he intended for that text to be public?
I mean, he did publish it on Truth Social, so yes.
But that's not what I asked. What do you think, Sophia?
No, I mean, I personally think that he just doesn't know how to use social media properly. I was kind of theorizing that this meant to be like a direct message, because I did not feel okay seeing that as a citizen of the U.S., knowing that this is the way that he, you know, likes to run his AG. So, yeah.
So let me tell you a funny story. The same lady has cut my hair for 30 years. So I go to see her, and she's talking about Trump. And so I said, but let me just ask you a professional question. As a hair cutter, how long would it take you to do Trump's hair? Sophia, what do you think she said?
Like 2 seconds.
No.
Or she would do it.
2 hours.
Why?
2 hours a day. And she walked me through all the steps. She said, by the way, she's a very close observer. Do you see how his hair goes up? Do you see his color? She said, you know, you have to have like a thing, and then you hold it up there, and then you have to put in this coloring and all this stuff. And I said, 2 hours a day. And she said, did you ever notice he never has any events in the morning? That's when he's tweeting. I said, what? She said, that's when he's tweeting, when he's getting his hair done. That's when he's tweeting. Now, in that circumstance, could you make a mistake and by accident send the wrong tweet?
Yeah, I've seen it happen before, and I think it's plausible that that happened.
Yes, but by the way, this is a communication between the president and the attorney general. Under the Trump immunity decision, are you allowed to inquire into that?
No, that's...
What if the message is sent on Truth Social? Should they be immune for that?
I mean, that's what the court said. Those conversations are immune from, you know, criminal charges.
Yeah, and in Watergate, many of you, none of you were born then, but Nixon was talking to the Attorney General, John Mitchell. That was the conspiracy. That was the basis for his impeachment. So you're saying that these kinds of conversations about illegal activity are per se the basis for evidentiary immunity? So I was told, I'm not sure if this is true or not, that Roberts, having written the immunity opinion, went on vacation, and then a bunch of people came up to him and started screaming at him in various places. And he was horrified. And he said, I don't know why people think it was so extreme, which is again a suggestion of how he's living in a bubble. You know, some of the justices are really just living in their own world, and reality doesn't really break through. Okay.
So we're down to our last 10 minutes, and I can't resist asking one or two sort of forward-looking questions. Sure. Just to know what you think about. And one is, you wrote in one of your blog posts, I think it was 100 Days of Lawlessness, but I wouldn't swear, that there's a need for structural reform. You're talking primarily about the checks and balances in the National Security Constitution. What we've talked about today goes a lot broader than that, about the total breakdown of checks and balances. But in light of what you've said and what I think we all know about the leanings of the current Supreme Court, how can we realistically fix any of this?
Well, I don't think that, personally, that it's over yet with the Supreme Court. I think that this is the decisive year, and this spring is the decisive spring. Why do I think? You know, Brett Kavanaugh was my student. I have a lot of thoughts about him, which I won't express here. But one thing is, I think that Brett Kavanaugh wants to rule against Trump in a 6-3 case. He doesn't want to be the fifth vote, but he's ready to be the sixth vote. Second, I think Amy Coney Barrett is a reasonable conservative of the ordinary kind. So I think it comes down to John Roberts. And I think it's about whether John Roberts views this as the determinant of the legacy of his court. And I heard him say once, looking at pictures in the Supreme Court conference room, he said, you might not be like John Marshall, but you don't want to end up like Roger Taney, the guy who wrote Dred Scott. And if I were talking to Roberts now, I'd say, hey, you're pretty close to Taney now. This spring will determine it. So are these messages getting through to you or not? Now, if they're not getting through, Michael, I agree. Possibility number two for a pushback is the midterms. Another piece of this will be the shutdown, which may or may not occur at the end of next week. So the politics of this, and finally, most of this is the result of Trump overplaying his hand. You know, everything we've discussed is stuff that he created proactively. You know, there's no reason for him to kill Venezuelan drug guys. He could have just continued the old policy. There's no reason for him to go nuts on tariffs. There's no reason for him to send National Guard into the city streets. He just did. So I think that Mike Tyson, that great philosopher, said everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Well, we've seen Trump's plan playing out. And the question is, will he get punched in the face either by the Supreme Court or by a congressional defeat in the midterms or some other catastrophic event like a pandemic, which is of his results from his incompetence or the incompetence of his people, like Bobby Kennedy Jr. So those are three things that we're looking at.
So if you had advice both for the members of the public viewing this tape and for law students in this seminar and elsewhere about what they can or should do, what would it be?
I'd say two things. One, don't lose hope. You know, I met Nelson Mandela once for 30 seconds, and they said to him, you know, you were in jail for 26 years. How did you survive? And he said, I really missed that time. I used to get a lot of reading done. Yeah, that's how you knew this guy survived. You know, he's indomitable. But then the other is, if you saw the movie The Martian with Matt Damon, you know, he gets out of being on Mars and they say, did you think you were finished? And he says, every day. But you solve one problem, you solve the next problem, you solve the next problem, you solve the next problem. And if you solve enough problems, you get to have a different president. And I think that's what we got to do. Fight it out one case at a time. And if we do that, don't give up. You know, just because there's an onslaught doesn't mean you have to give into it. That would be my two pieces of advice. So I've got a bunch of students waiting outside. I hope it's okay. And I hope this was all right for all you guys. You did a great job, by the way. You're great. You're all well prepared. You're worthy of Professor Frumkin.
I don't know about that, but I will say that Harold has absolutely mellowed compared to his first year, where he was utterly terrifying. Utterly terrifying. I can't believe he was afraid of us, because we sure were afraid of him.
Oh, good.
But it was a great experience, and actually much of a model for how to teach, I think. So thank you so much for doing this. I cannot tell you how grateful I am. Sure.
Right. Hope to see you guys in Miami.